probably the only thing I can do for the world is work on me. And if working on me is to live a life as true to myself as I can possibly live, that would be a life of connection. That would be a life of physical movement and looking after my health. That would be a life of adventure. And all of those things can support a greater world. If I'm living a fulfilled life and I'm fulfilled, if I'm filled from within through like inspiring action, I'm probably not going to consume and be greedy because I don't need anything outside of myself.
Hello humans, welcome back to the podcast. Please subscribe if you can. Remarkable amount of people listen. Do not subscribe, please do. Okay, Pat Divilly on the podcast. Amazing man. If I had kids, he would be the perfect role model. I truly believe that. I think he's excellent at what he does. He's a motivational speaker, he's a coach. He has an amazing podcast that you should check out called the Pat Divilly Podcast. And all the links for those things are in the bio underneath. We talk about shadow work, we talk about his journey, we talk about archetypes, we just delve into him and his work and how to embrace us and who we are. Just that little bit more, get to the truth and the essence of what we want and what we need from our relationships, our work and life in general. So enjoy the podcast with Pat Divilly. Podcast is going to be profound. Greatness is found in the unity of self. The unity. Like that.
Interesting.
Of self.
Unity, yes.
Let's start there. I think this is going to be a new tradition.
Oh, really?
Unless they refuse a tea. I'll always have one. Greatness is found in the unity of self. What does that mean for you?
Oh, God.
You've been on a bit of a journey, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Where did it all begin?
Where did it all begin? I never know how far to go back, because I always do feel the first few years of our life dictate how we see the world.
Yes.
So sometimes I get fed up of listening to myself, going back to my childhood, but I was bullied quite a bit as a child. So that definitely formed a blueprint for me. And I think only in recent years I've really unpacked that and recognized like how much of my overachieving behavior in my 20s was a result of wanting to show the world that I'm enough and that I fit in and that I'm cool and whatever else. But in terms of where I started, I grew up a pretty normal life. The bit of bullying happened in my childhood. And again, I don't know how much actually happened versus, it's funny, we all look back and they say like memory's not very accurate for a lot of us.
For sure. But I guess it's what's true for us, right? And
Exactly.
how we're responding to situations now. That isn't warranted or isn't justified, or I heard once it's like, well, the theme tune isn't matching to the song kind of thing.
Sure.
There's like a mismatch of like what happened in reality and my response to it.
Yeah. And even subtle thing, I know, like, there's a thing with lad banter, right? So lad banter is kind of take the mick out of your friends and stuff like that.
I'm just going to turn this off,
Yeah.
sorry. We're going to cook. I've just got the heater working, so
Yes,
it's like,
okay.
I'm proud, I want to show it off.
It was good, it was nice.
So lad banter, very common, right?
Common thing, and it's a thing in sport, and for a lot of guys that's how they connect, and that's normal or whatever. And I think having the lens of being weak from being bullied, lad banter never felt like lad banter to me. It was always, they're attacking me, they're coming for me, and so I always had a hard time connecting with men, I think, as a result of that. But in terms of where I started, that was where I started. My teens, I found martial arts and weight training, and that kind of gave me confidence for the first time in my life. And I knew from the first day I went to the gym, I'm going to be a fitness guy, I'm going to own a gym. But the industry wasn't really an industry at that time, so that's gone back 20 years now. But I moved to England, I did a master's here in exercise and nutrition science. I suppose to rewind a few years, I had gone to America for a few summers to pursue cage fighting.
Oh, wow.
And people hear me say that now and they're like, oh, you must have been good. I'm like, no, I was genuinely no good.
What was it like back then? Because even USC wasn't, growing up, it was very not unknown.
Yeah. There wasn't much happening in Ireland at the time. I mean, John Kavanagh had a SBG in its early days. I went to a gym called Undisputed in San Diego. It was amazing. I contacted a bunch of gyms in California. I said, I hate the college course that I'm doing. I need something to look forward to in the summer. Can I come and train? And this guy came back to me and he said, oh, my grandparents are Irish. We'd love to have you. I'll give you a job in the gym. You can sleep in the gym. We'll look after you. And they really looked after me. I trained with Dominic Cruz. He was the main guy there. I think he had just signed with the UFC. If not, he was still with WEC. War Machine I train with, who's kind of become an infamous character that's in prison now for life. I met some really interesting people out there. But one of the really interesting people I met was a guy called Eric Coleman. And Eric was about 10 years older than me. And I distinctly remember sitting on the beach with him once, and I was saying, dude, there's a lot of people in the gym that are delusional. They think they're going to be fighters, and they were like weekend warriors, right? They came in and they'd beat the crap out of the bag, and they loved the idea of it, but they never trained properly. And I was like, Eric, am I one of those? And he's like, no, you're the real deal. He's like, if you want to do this, you can do this. And he always showed me huge belief. But he always struggled with his own self-belief. So he's 28, I was 18. He was a kettlebell instructor. He was doing all this cool stuff that I thought was amazing. And I didn't realize how much he was struggling with his mental health at that time. And when I came back to Ireland after my second summer out there, he took his own life. And again, at that age, that was new to me. It wasn't something I'd experienced up to that point. And
what exactly was new to you?
Suicide being that close.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get a phone call and say, like, your friend has shot himself, and for him to have been like this guy that believed in me so much, and to just, it was hard to get my head around. I knew he was in a dark place. I just didn't realize how dark. But at the time, I was actually studying geography in college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think when Eric passed, I thought, I want to be a fitness guy. And partially it was, I want to do what Eric did.
Yeah, how has that shaped you? Like a real significant moment?
Yeah. I think I just look back. It's funny. It is that whole thing that when you look back on your life, you're almost like, oh, this thing is unfolding in a very particular way. It's almost like you're living backwards sometimes. But a big thing in my life over the last 15 years has been helping people believe in themselves when they don't. And that's what Eric did for me back then. So I think instinctively it left a blueprint on me. I was an insecure, lost, lacking in confidence, all those things. And here was a guy that I thought was cool that was saying, you can do whatever you want to do, you know. So anyway, I pursued the fitness thing. I failed pretty miserably with my first fitness business, which left me with a lot of shame. I was 24. I think I moved back in with my parents, which in retrospect, not a big deal. You're not supposed to have it figured out at 24. But I had like such high ambitions for myself because I thought I need to become somebody, because nobody likes me, nobody believes in me, nobody sees me, nobody supports me, all this kind of stuff. And so I gotta make it happen. You know, I've since gone on to study a lot around the archetypes, and one of the wounds for men, for anyone, is, you know, the wound that I'm not enough. Like, that's the wound of the king. And in response to that, you have two options. You can roll over and die and say, okay, I'm not enough, you're right. Or you can go the opposite way. You say, I'm going to show you how enough I am. And that was kind of my mentality in my early 20s. But long story short, I failed with a business. I came back in to my hometown, lived with my parents, got work in a pizza shop back in 2012. And my dad at one point said to me, half of your problem, and he was very supportive, but he was struggling with seeing his son not being able to get out of bed and just struggling with depression. And my dad said, half of your problem is you're worried about your own problems and you're living in your own head and you think you're the only one in the world with stress and problems. And that was a bit of tough love. But he said, if you went out and you started helping people, you wouldn't be long getting past whatever you're going through. And my mentality at the time was, I can't help myself, never mind anyone else. But I offered to start doing free training and nutrition plans for people. So during the day I work in the pizza shop. On my lunch break, I'd go and give people nutrition plans. And after a couple of months, a guy messaged me. He said, here's my before and after. I know you didn't ask for it, but if you can share this on social media and it helps you, you're welcome to. So I shared his results. And it got me my first 5 clients at my local beach, which was the start of my professional journey. And having 5 clients just transformed my life because I had something to get up in the morning for. Long story short, within a year I had kind of a couple of 100 clients in Galway, and I just developed this community and this culture and opened a gym. And then a lot of my generation had immigrated to the States and Australia because of the recession. So people started asking, can we do this online? And then between 2012, 2016, I grew to 20,000 clients globally through online training courses. So lots of external change. To my surprise, there wasn't a lot of internal change. It was like the more I accomplished, the more magnifying glass there was on my insecurities. because people are saying, wow, Pat, you did well. You bought a house, you bought a car, wow, you're so successful. I'm just like this imposter syndrome thing going on. I'm like, what if they really knew? And so at 28, I got kind of burnt out, a bit disillusioned with it all. It was the first time in my life where I had nothing I could point to and sort of say, that's why I'm sad. Like, I wasn't being bullied. I wasn't broke anymore. I had a successful business. I had a house. I had a car. I had everything I could ever want. But I was completely overwhelmed. I was anxious. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't look people in the eye. I was lost again. And I think when things are wrong in your life and you can point to it, there's a bit of understanding. But when things are right and you can't, it's easy to kind of dismiss your feelings and start shaming yourself and say, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be grateful, all this kind of stuff. But in any case, I started going to energy healers and shamans and psychologists and psychiatrists and meditation gurus and yoga retreats and plant medicines. And the last 7-8 years has been like trying to understand myself. Unraveling, yeah, unwinding. And yeah, it's a great journey. I enjoyed the journey.
What do you think the common thread is with people not believing in themselves? Do you think, speaking from your experience, where it roots back to? Has that been one of the biggest things you've understood?
Yeah, I mean, any men's circle I've ever sat in, I do a lot of men's work. I sit in circles with other groups and I run my own groups. I've never met a man who didn't on some level think he wasn't enough. And it comes up every time in some capacity. Where does it stem from? I mean, specific to men, because again, I'm doing a lot of stuff with men. I think there's the issue with the father and the father wound and the lack of acknowledgement and blessing from our fathers a lot of the time.
Acceptance, right? And seeing each other.
Yeah. I mean, traditionally, you've probably heard a lot about initiation and this idea that we would have been raised in a village, hypothetically, and you'd have a lot of different influential male figures and female figures in the environment. And then we go to the nuclear family and it's mum and dad, hopefully, if even that. And dad's off working since the Industrial Revolution. And so if I see my dad, I see him in the evening when he's stressed and he's tired. And so he doesn't want to hear about my day. He doesn't want to play football with me in the garden. Or maybe he does, but he's exhausted. And it's just a different dynamic, right? So we don't learn what healthy masculinity is. And I think when you don't learn what healthy masculinity is and you don't develop that sense of belief in yourself, for me at least, I came to see the world as a competition. And when the world is a competition and you're competing with other people, you can't ever be enough because you're playing this game that you can't ever win because the game is always changing. Who knows? We need to bottle some I am enough juice.
Yeah, that lands there is that competitive compare narrative.
Yeah.
You're comparing yourself to, and that's really exaggerated in our culture, especially obviously with social media. We can't talk enough about how we're comparing it all the time. Yeah, I think it is one of the biggest. Do you find that competitive nature has kind of fallen away, or do you aim it back at yourself now? Compete with yourself?
Yeah, I think when I'm in a good place, that's where I'm at. I can easily drift and I can easily kind of lose my center. I kind of think of my center as when I'm living in accordance to my values and my purpose and my mission, and I'm being true to myself. And then, so many times I lose my center, and it's, I suppose the development of self is like learning to come back to that when we get pulled away. Funnily, like I had the 20s thing where I was hustling and achieving and running all over the world and like doing all this cool stuff and all this external stuff. And I almost became disillusioned at 28 with like, oh, success didn't work. It didn't make me happy. So I almost went to the extreme other polarity of no structure, no discipline, complete freedom and flow. And I think the last couple of years has been trying to find that middle ground. And I could probably lean at times toward a little more discipline. Like this week I'm in London for a week of corporate work. And it's been good this week to be a bit more disciplined with, as you know, I just come from Jujitsu training. I've been eating well during the week whilst I'm here. I know like the last couple of years I wouldn't have had that discipline. I'd be like, oh, I'm away traveling. I can kind of go with the flow. So it's, I think it's just checking in consistently and seeing where I'm at and what I need.
What do you think it is about Jiu-Jitsu that
makes you come alive. So I see it in your eyes
Really?
every time you
Really?
talk about it. There's a unique fragrance, let's say, that comes from people when they talk about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
It's a humbling experience.
It's amazing, and I guess it's funny. It's funny in a sense that that's where I started, because when I went and did the cage fighting in America, it was jiu-jitsu back then. That's what I was doing, and I started martial arts at 15, and it was the first thing that I was good at. I won Irish titles, and like judo and jiu-jitsu kind of go hand in hand. But when I found drink in my 20s and girls and all that distraction in my 20s, and then tried to become successful, I lost jiu-jitsu from 18 to 28, and I just went back to it at 28 at that time, where I was a bit lost. And I think it just put a lot of the pieces together for me again. And it was funny, I went to a 9-day retreat at one point, and we were told to bring an item that represented us, like to introduce ourselves to the group. Like, how would you? And it couldn't be anything to do with your family, or because people are great for doing that. They'll bring, this is my kids are my world, and they kind of just, it's a seminar answer. Maybe it's true, but the guy here said it's kind of a seminar answer. You're saying what you think you're supposed to say. He says, I want to know who you are. So of all the things I could have brought, I found a medal that I had won in America when I was 18. And then you have this thing in your hand, and you're introducing yourself to a group of strangers, and what does this represent? And I said, I had no money, I had nothing, I slept on the gym floor, but I did what I loved, and I did it 3 times a day, and it was amazing. And like, it's just like in my head, I was like, I've got loads of money now, but I don't do the things that I love anymore. Like, what's this about? And that brought me back to the mats. And yeah, just, we're animals at the end of the day. And we've been, one of my mentors often says that if you take an animal and put them in the zoo, the animal gets sick. And it's not the animal's fault. It's the environment the animal's in. And for me, my mental health suffers when I live in a chaotic and stressful environment. And it's not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of my environment. So I have to be proactive, and I have to look after myself physically. Another huge part of jiu-jitsu for me is the community aspect. Healthy competition, healthy bonds with the people you're meeting. There's so many lessons. It's been, it's a blessing. I love it. I'd give up everything I do to I probably shouldn't say, but I was pulled by the police.
Careful what you wish for.
yeah. I was pulled by the police for speeding recently, which I obviously shouldn't have been doing. But he says, you're getting penalty points. I think it's the same here, right? You get penalty points if you're fast, and then
I've been doing a lot of driving. There's been a few letters come through.
Really?
Yeah.
So if we get X amount of penalty points, you're off the road for 2 years. And then I start panicking about it. I got my points. I don't have any other points, I don't think, so it's fine.
Gonna give you some points. Can I still do jiu-jitsu?
That's the first thing my head went to. I said, if I can't drive anymore, I didn't think about work, I didn't think about nothing. I was like, I wonder if I can rent an apartment beside the jiu-jitsu gym. But yeah, it's huge. And it's an interesting one. Have you done much jiu-jitsu or any jiu-jitsu?
A couple of times at a men's retreat,
cool.
actually, which is, I did. It just came my way. And I did it once. We did something that's coming out for Channel 4.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting. Danny Dyer, I think, I don't really care.
Okay.
Danny Dyer was there. He's doing a documentary series on 21st Century Man. Quite interesting.
Cool.
But
Nice.
I got invited to that in outside Kent. But yeah, my friend who puts on these retreats, Maps of the Masculine, he's called Doug, connected with him on the podcast, and then he started getting into men's work, so we reconnected, and he has got his friend in to host a real interesting workshop around jiu-jitsu, and just how we can also use some of the stuff that we've been working on in other areas of the retreat to then bring it into that kind of arena. And we did this one thing where it was like a terminology that goes out the window here, I have no idea, but basically you were in submission and then you turned on top of the person, and the person playing the kind of more active role was repeating all the things that you and a critic would say.
Oh, wow.
So you would give him some ammo to
That's
use,
cool.
and then you kind of flip that on its head.
Yeah.
And I don't know what people in the jiu-jitsu world would think of that, but
it's a really welcoming community.
Mm-hmm.
I trained this morning with a guy, and we were partnered, and just the way he was interacting with me, I felt like he was probably pretty new, and he was saying, should how does that feel? He goes, oh, maybe I need to go a little. It was quite like mutual. And then I was like,
Yeah.
how long have you been training? He says, oh, 14 years. I'm a black belt for the last 4. It's just like, wow.
Wow.
So humble, so nice.
That's so interesting. I was thinking when you mentioned it, you're in London, you're going to jiu-jitsu. I was like, how does that even work? Like, do you just rock up and time slots and then people just
They've
host the...
They've 30 classes a day over in Hadra Gracie's place.
Okay, so there's a structure in place for that class, and whoever's new, you just kind of roll with people when you're...
Yeah, they'll have gi and no gi. So gi is with your suit
Sure.
on, no gi is kind of I won't say casual wear, rash guard and shorts. And there's different levels. So right, you need to be above 3-stripe white belt to go to the intermediate class and stuff like that. But I've trained and traveled all over the world, and most of the places I've trained haven't even taken money off me. They're just like, you're very well. It's an amazing community. Great way to meet people. It's funny though, it's like when you're really close to it, you can, I suppose, like anything, you can forget that it's... I ran a men's event 2 months ago maybe, and I was like, oh, I'm going to throw some jiu-jitsu in there. There's like a couple of older guys came in that had no experience with this stuff, and I'm like, okay, wrap your legs around the other guy. And they were just looking at each other. They're like, what? Like, no, I'm not doing it.
Oh, really?
They eventually got into it. They got really into it. But
my experience is people look at yoga and they look at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
One is you're very much more in contact. It could be perceived as a lot more homosexual than yoga.
Yeah.
But yet people are more up for jiu-jitsu than averse to yoga because they think it's emasculating. Or
they were all buzzing by 20 minutes in. They were just like, because it feels normal. You wrestle around when you're kids and stuff like that. It's part of us. Funny you mentioned yoga. I feel like jiu-jitsu and yoga and surfing, like those 3 things, people are just, they get really into it and it's quite cool and all this kind of stuff. I had heard loads of people I admire talk about yoga and like they rave about yoga, and I wanted to like yoga. Like I'm sure a lot of people want to like jiu-jitsu but don't quite get it. Hasn't clicked yet. So I thought I'm going to go to Thailand and do my yoga teacher training, and then I'll know if I like it or not. Because I had done 2 classes and I hated it. I was like, I'm going to go for a month. And I still didn't like yoga. I did my 200 hours and I was just like, some girl in class was like, how are you so confident for a man who can't touch his toes?
Confident?
Because I was about to teach a class and everyone else...
Oh, really?
They're all like amazing yogis and they're all freaked out about teaching their class. And I was just like, it is what it is. She's like, how are you so confident? I said, well, I've never taught a class before, so it's going to be the best class I've ever done. So like, maybe not for you.
That's a good shout.
Yeah.
Touche.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the deeper you go into yoga, then the more you accept someone that can't touch their toes, the more you can embrace them and understand that it's not really about that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If someone like teachers, for example, it's a very should be a very good experience because they are most non-judgmental and easygoing and just present.
Yeah.
And just accepting of this is going to teach me something, whatever it is. Yeah.
It's probably a bit of an analogy there in life in terms of like if you have 20 people doing their yoga teacher training and they're different shapes and sizes and different levels of experience, all those 20 people have a role in the yoga world. They'll all fill classes if they kind of lean on their strengths and like I'm the guy, my niche is I'm the guy that can't touch his toes, come and do yoga. And there'll be loads of people that will be less intimidated by going to my yoga class than going to her yoga class where she's doing the splits, and then there's people that will. So if we embrace who we are, I suppose there's always going to be the right people who will show up.
Well, the more I've understood yoga is that it's not actually the best way to get flexible.
Okay.
Like if you do it enough, of course you're going to improve your flexibility, but it's not. If you do more mobility stuff and understand that like weighted exercises and stuff like going to end range of motion and going there with like strength, building strength there, that's how you're going to get more flexible. But yeah, lots of facets to it. Anyway, so do you concentrate on your strengths? I'm always interested to know if people concentrate on their strengths and just somewhat leave the weaknesses and you're like, right, I'm not good at those things, but let's just focus on my strengths. Or do you lean into the weaknesses the most and think, well, I'm strong at that, I don't need to work on that, I'll focus on that. The weaknesses are where it's at.
I'm always referencing different teachers and stuff, but John DeMartini is a guy that I've studied with over the years, and he's very much based on values. He loves this idea of living your life in accordance to your values, and sometimes when you work out your values, you're maybe looking at more traits. So I might say, I want to be someone who's playful and confident and inspiring, But John's way is a little bit different, and it more centers around the areas of life that are most interesting to you. So for me, my highest values would be teaching or coaching, learning and education, travel and adventure, and jiu-jitsu. Like, those are my highest values.
Interesting, because I thought it would be authenticity, curiosity, and playfulness.
Those are my... Oh, you've been listening to the podcast. But those are...
They're interwoven in all those things.
I think so.
Are they...
So the way I think of core values, it's different how John, I don't know if John doesn't call them core values. For me, the core values are, who am I when I'm at my best, and like, what's the purest expression or the best expression of me. So I know that when I'm in a good place and when I'm at my best and when I'm leaning in and when I'm playful, compassionate and curious and connected and authentic, and I'll come back to John in a second, but knowing my values is like a North Star, right? So if I get asked to do, like I just got asked to do on the way over, I was checking my email, and there's an Irish magazine that's like Hello Magazine or OK Magazine, and they get like famous people and they'll say, oh, at home with the Beckhams or whatever, and they'll do a photo shoot with the Beckhams in their house. This crowd were like, do you want to be our featured guest for like At Home with Pat and your partner, if you have a partner? It's just like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I was like, no, that's not me. I would be out of alignment if I were to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do it someday. but I know that if I know what's my values, authenticity. Does that feel authentic to me? No, not so much. But the other piece, just to kind of tie on to that doesn't get spoken about as much, is if you know your values, you can figure out your shadow values, which are almost the opposite. So if my value is authenticity, that's my North Star, and I use that as my compass for life. Does this feel authentic? And I lean into authenticity. My shadow will be fakeness or phoniness. That's what will trip me up. And when I'm tired, when I'm exhausted, when I'm depressed, when I'm out of alignment, they're the ones to watch. Like, I have a value on connection, but there's times in my life where I'm terrified of connecting with people and I want to disconnect and I want to isolate. So generally when I'm in a dip, I'm like, oh, I'm in my shadow value. Can I lean into the values? But back to John, talks about values in a different sense, and he has like 13 questions. I think he has a free questionnaire somewhere online, and it'd be things like, what do you talk about when unprompted? So I'm like, jiu-jitsu, psychology and philosophy, and adventure. What do you do in your free time? Boom, boom, boom. And the 13 questions, you write them all out, and then you find the most common words that came up. So let's say it's adventure, training and education, if they're your three values, or family, music, and gardening. His thing is that you should just completely immerse your life in those things. Everything should revolve around those things. So I think John's probably in his 60s. He's coaching education and travel. He just travels the world. He coaches and trains people, and he studies. Doesn't do anything else. He's not able to drive a car. He's never driven a car. He's never cooked a meal, I don't think. Like, it's just crazy. So his thing is go all in, because he says that if your life is composed of the things you want to do and you get to do and you're excited to do, you're going to have an inspired life. But he says if your life is made up of things that you have to do and you've got to do and you should do, then you're going to live a kind of life of desperation, if you will. So he says you're always trying to get to a place where more and more of your things are things you want to do, so in a sense, I know I'm not good at like cooking, particularly. I'm not good at cleaning my house. There's lots of things I'm not good at. So if I can get support on those things, and I can, afford to pay something, pay for support and things I'm weak. So in that sense, I don't really work on my weaknesses. In another sense, if there's like character flaws or there's things that are reflected to me, or there's aspects of my work, so like a big part of my work would be public speaking, and I'm always asking the people that bring me in to give me feedback. I'm like, don't tell me it was great. Like, tell me what worked, what didn't work. I want to get better at this. I don't take it personal. So in that regard, I'm trying to get better on my weaknesses.
Yeah, I'm going to be asking you for feedback on this podcast.
So far, so good, brother.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I love doing that, and love like getting uncomfortable intentionally to really ask for feedback and seeing what my body's sensations, reactions to that feedback is. I'm just like, just really, you've got safe space here. Just say what you need to say.
To be honest, I led a breath workshop in Dublin 2 weeks ago, and there was a girl that I know there who's like a good friend of mine, cacao facilitator, deep in the work. She's done a lot of this kind of stuff. So at the end of the workshop, I say, guys, if you got feedback, I'd really appreciate it. I'll drop you an email. Feel free to pass on any feedback. I don't take it personal. It really helps me. And she sent me a voice note that night, and she's like, "I'll have feedback for you. I'm going to send it on to you."
It's interesting when they're really passionate about it.
Yeah, but she's like, "I'm kind of busy."
Don't be too enthusiastic to critique me.
She's like, "I'm busy this," and usually she's like, "I'm great," and she's like, "I'm kind of busy this evening, but I'll have feedback for you." And suddenly I won't take it personal and all this kind of thing, like, was not
interesting what reactions start to come up of like excuses or like, just immediate response. Oh, that was good because of that. And then,
well, I had to wait 4 days. It took 4 days for her to get in touch.
Oh,
and
really?
It was like minor enough feedback, but I definitely, like, there was a bit of me that was like, oh, I am taking this personal. I'm not as enlightened as I sometimes like to think.
Yeah, it's good to be aware of that.
Yeah.
So you touched on the shadow around values, which is interesting. Would you say that's a different framework to say integrating your shadow? I guess you've got a light side of your values, the ones that you want to shine and want to spend time with, and the shadow side of your values. But I'd say that, let me know if you agree, that's different to like shadow work, let's say, where we're really trying to lean into the subconscious sides of us or the things that we've not liked about ourselves for some time, and then we make the subconscious conscious. Talk me through that process of like how, as the great Carl Jung said, we will, until we make the conscious unconscious. Sorry, the opposite way around. That was unconscious. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will run our lives, and we'll call it fate. And that just blows me away.
So I suppose my understanding of the shadow is we come into the world 360-degree personality, and all of you is welcome, and hopefully that's the case for a good period of time. Obviously everyone has different backgrounds, and some people have really, really tough childhoods, but hopefully there's at least some time there where all of you is welcome and you feel safe to be yourself. But then we become socialized, and that makes complete sense that we're not running around naked and climbing trees and throwing food at each other and whatever else in our adult lives. And so we have to become socialized. And so there's kind of different layers. The first layer is your family will teach you implicitly as to what's acceptable and what's not. And so depending on the household I grow up in, maybe my creativity is celebrated, or maybe it's shunned. Maybe my enthusiasm is celebrated, or it's rejected. Maybe my anger is welcome, or it's shamed. And so either through explicit, which is where someone explicitly says, don't do that in this house, or implicit, where you recognize that when you're sad, maybe your parents don't want to be around you. You're picking up messages all the time. So the first layer, as I say, is family. Second layer is more community. So you go into school, and there's teachers, and there's the other children, and now there's a new dynamic too. We're effectively filtering ourselves down, and the box as to who we can be gets smaller and smaller. And then there's the cultural element of the media that I consume growing up. What is a man? What is a woman? Where do I fit into this thing? As an Irish person, I'm supposed to drink all the time and be merry and all this kind of stuff. There's all these things. Religion, what shame does that put on me? And so we learn who we need to be to get love. And Gabor Mate talks about the battle between authenticity and acceptance. So we have these two driving forces. I want to be authentic. I want to be myself, but I also want to be connected to the tribe. And there's times in our life, in our early life, where those two things conflict. So I notice that when I'm myself and I'm playful and enthusiastic and creative, the guys make fun of me because I'm being playful and enthusiastic and all these things, and I shouldn't be that way. And so now there's this battle. As a child, I'm like, do I want to be rejected by the crew, or do I want to be myself? And usually we'll pick to be accepted by the crew and to abandon ourselves. And so we could do that for years and then wake up saying, who the fuck am I now? So when we're celebrated for certain aspects of ourselves, the persona develops, and the persona is like the mask that I show to the world. I'm a nice guy. I'm hardworking. I'm enthusiastic. All these things.
I'm funny. That's a big one.
I'm funny, yeah.
Being funny is a quick way to be liked.
Yeah, and it's a defense strategy, right? Like if I'm in, I often say if you're bullied, as an example, if I'm bullied, there's a part of you that becomes overwhelmed by the experience, and you go into a freeze response. Then your psyche very quickly comes up with characters that keep you safe. So the funny guy is a good way of staying safe. If you're bullied and you become the bully, that's another way of. So we develop these different parts. But when we're celebrated for certain aspects of ourselves, like say my dad loves football, and so he gets me playing football, and I'm celebrated when I play, even though I'm not really into it. I come to associate, I get love when I do this thing. So my my masks, my persona develop, and we can think of the persona as what I'm proud to be, and then like I don't know if we're at neutral, and you become proud of something, you inherently become ashamed of the opposite. So if I'm proud of being hardworking, I'm ashamed of the fact that sometimes I'm lazy potentially.
Judgment.
Yes. So like there's this split that happens, right? And that's why we go to war with ourselves, because one part of us wants to have a loving relationship and the other wants complete freedom and wants to be chaotic and crazy and doesn't trust people. And I think the shadow integration is to, there's so many ways. Obviously our reactivity, as we mentioned earlier, is one way of seeing our shadow. Our projections obviously are another way. So projections go two ways. Projections are the people I judge as being worse than me or below me. That's my dark shadow, and this is the stuff that I've projected in myself. But equally, the people I love and admire in life are showing me my golden shadow. So a lot of us, as children, because we live in the West and there's so much emphasis on the mind, you'll be celebrated for getting good results in your exams, but maybe not celebrated for the music that you wrote or the art that you created. So some of us will have lost our creativity, and then we spend our lives going to concerts and so inspired by these musicians because we think they have something we don't have. So that's another example of projection. But I think
I often find that it's interesting to observe other people's perhaps non-acceptance of the parts of you. So say if I'm not clean, for example, and someone just doesn't like that about me, noticing if they're clean, is that a value of yours, and that's just like the way you want to live, and noticing, observing that, well, you're not clean either, so it's actually just a reflection of the things you don't like about or accept about yourself, and you're just projecting that onto me. I think that's like it's like the shadow playing out. It's interesting to observe.
Well, interesting piece with projection. Projection is kind of a funny one because sometimes people bypass by just like not taking any responsibility in their life. They're like, oh, well, if you're triggered by my behavior, that's your work to do. And it's like, no, you're being an asshole. Stop being an asshole. But a useful thing I think to look at is, am I informed or am I disturbed by the situation? So I ended up being late today because I was training and then traveling across and stuff. And I messaged you and I said, I'm going to be late. I hope that's okay. And you were okay with it. In that incident, I don't know if that's the best incident, but like you've been informed that I'm going to be late. So you're aware that I'm going to be late, but you weren't disturbed by it. Like didn't really irk you and didn't really cause a big emotional response within you.
Relieved, actually.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
But yeah, if I had other plans, they might have had a different reaction or response.
Yeah, and if you've got a story and you've got something around, like, let me try to think of a better, maybe, better example. Let's say I look at influencers online, and I'm like, oh God, I kind of throw my eyes up to heaven. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be
contempt.
That's a lot of waffle that they're kind of talking about.
Sure.
That's one thing. Maybe I'm informed. I'm like, I'm not really into that. That's not really my thing. I wouldn't do things that way myself personally.
Yeah.
Being disturbed by the same influencer would be to be incessantly looking and leaving shitty comments, and just like that's a sign of like shadow material being activated. Because I can see something in people. I'm like, oh, there's a bit of that in me, so I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that I still do the thing though and slag them off, or I'm like, God, and I'm even playing it out. Like I'm observing this whole thing. Like I know why it's there. Like there's a podcaster, and it triggers the hell out of me. Because it's a part of me that feels like I didn't deserve that, or it's like all this energy is being thrown my way into my psyche, and I'm just like, I can't believe that they've just said that to this person. Like, how are they getting away with these things? Like, it's just so I can see through this. I feel like I can see through it, and it's fascinating. What would you say to that?
I don't have a really clean framework around that specifically, but what comes to me is maybe do I notice okay, so I'm triggered, so there's an emotional response. I can first maybe ask what's my judgment. So what is my judgment toward that person?
It's around fairness perhaps, and there's an unfairness.
So if you're going to finish this statement, they are
fake.
They're fake. So the person that you're judging is fake. And how do you feel when you think that this person is fake?
I feel as they are
Now, how do you feel when you
Mhm.
judge them to be fake?
I feel deceived somewhat,
Okay.
or betrayed, or feel upset.
Okay. And what's your judgment about how it should be?
They should get found out.
They should get found out. And I shouldn't be deceived or...
But this is all the story that
Yeah.
I'm just contriving. Really?
I like to get to the feeling, and like that's the piece. So
Yeah,
like
for
I have
sure.
a judgment, and then there's a feeling.
How it makes me feel.
Yeah, like when maybe an intimate relationship. If I've got all these judgments and I'm pointing fingers and I've got frustrations and all that, really they're just like, that's me just running around in my mind to get away from my body and what's been experienced in my body.
Sure.
So I might say, my judgment is my partner doesn't respect me and doesn't take time for me. And I can say that. And of course, when I say that, they're going to get defensive because it's a personal attack and they're not going to be able to stand in that. They're going to, and it's going to everything's going to speed up and get chaotic. But if I can sit with that and say my partner doesn't respect me, and how does that make me feel when I believe that my partner doesn't respect me? Sad. Okay, can I give a little bit of space to the sadness? Can I breathe into the sadness? Does the sadness remind me of anything in the past when your incidents there with they're fake and I don't trust them? Does someone being fake and not trusting that person remind me of anything in my past? And you can kind of breathe into that. And that might bring a different emotion. It could be fear. I'm fearful because in the past, people that are being deceitful have let me down. I'm angry because and then it could be to give some space to that emotion. I don't know if that's the way, but that's something I would play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely play with it. It's fascinating to lean into the, what is it saying? What's it communicating to me around, like, what stories what beliefs have I got about certain things, like how fake people are able to, like what I perceive as being fake or not justified, and maybe that's the reflection of how I'm judging, like, the fakeness about myself, the times in my life where I've been fake.
Yeah.
Back to the comedy piece, it's like I remember like going to social events with like ready with like something prepared so I could be funny.
Okay, yeah.
Or knowing certain situations where I would just regurgitate the same thing in different spaces to just be the funny one. Whereas it's very unauthentic. Like, it's not, it's just like repeating the same story because it's going to get a laugh.
But there can be a compassion piece then, surely, because you might say, well, I understand why my younger self would have did that because they wanted to fit in.
Absolutely.
So maybe this asshole on the podcast is doing the same thing with their funniness or fakeness, is they're wanting to fit in.
Yeah, it always comes down to compassion, right?
Unfortunately. Is it? Yeah, I think it's Ram Dass that says the only thing I can do for you is work on me, and the only thing you can do for me is work on you. There is a part of me with that recently, like that. I have my corporate cap when I'm in the corporate world and have to watch my P's and Q's. I do wear a few hats. I feel like an alien sometimes in those spaces. It just feels so different to my day to day. But there is a part of me that, like, I don't know, is worried about the world in terms of I don't know. I live in Galway. I live close to the beach, and I get to go in the sea, and I've got great friends, and go to Jujitsu, and I do my bits and pieces, and I really like that life. And then when I come into the city, I'm like, wow, this is very different to, like, this is not right or wrong. It's just very different. But when I have judgments, then I'm like, oh, there's a lot of greed in the world. Like, there's a lot of people like needing to make a lot of money and like wear fancy clothes and all this kind of stuff. Of course, the piece I need to work on is the greed within me. And my instant response can be, I'm not greedy anymore. I'm not greedy. But then I'm just like, compared to, I don't know why I was thinking about this recently. I was like, compared to what? Like, I'm very greedy compared to someone who has nothing. And I think about what I consume in a year from, across the board. So
where does that finish? When does the just landing in gratitude and just doing your best for yourself, like, where does that, because you can constantly be doing that, and I think we live in an age where our generation have grown up. We have we have access to information, but we also know how to use that resource and use it well, and we can understand things, and we can find holes and stuff, and like use the power of technology to understand more about the world. And we live in an age where we just know that what position the world is in, let's say, that we can be doing more. And and we're right. That's valid.
Mm.
But when does that stop becoming motivational and start becoming really self-destructive? You cannot stop thinking about doing more, and not just doing more in a production sense, but doing more for the community, the planet.
Well, funnily, what comes to me when you say that is again back to Ram. If the only thing I can do for me is work on you, probably the only thing I can do for the world is work on me. And if working on me is to live a life as true to myself as I can possibly live, that would be a life of connection. That would be a life of physical movement and looking after my health. That would be a life of adventure. And all of those things can support a greater world. If I'm living a fulfilled life and I'm fulfilled, if I'm filled from within through like inspiring action, I'm probably not going to consume and be greedy because I don't need anything outside of myself. So maybe that's the answer is, living. I think the closer you live to your values, whatever your values are, the less you need externally. The less you need externally, the less people you're going to hurt, the less pain you're going to transfer, I should say. So.
Yeah. What's one of the things you find in your workshops? Maybe the corporate stuff. Like, maybe speak to that a little bit, and what friction you find in those spaces. Because is that the bulk of your work in terms of?
My work is so I do breath work stuff. I do men's work, and then I do a bit of private stuff, and then I do public workshops, and then I do the corporate. The corporate's it's a good chunk of it. It's a bizarre space.
Really, is it similar companies that come back around, or?
There's a lot of companies that I would do kind of probably 8 to 12 gigs a year for, and I do a lot of, which I quite enjoy actually. The bit I enjoy the most is I'll do emerging leaders programs where it might be young. Most of them are quite young, like in their mid-20s, and they're getting promoted to the next level of leadership. So I'm in to talk about imposter syndrome and your emotional health and your mental health, and I'm quite blunt. I'll go in and I'll say, look at the people 20 years ahead of you in the company. That's where you're going if you don't look after yourself, you know. I'm very clear. I say, look, I'm not here to impress the company. I don't care about the company. I'm here for you guys as individuals. Because sometimes I'll get email. Like I had a reporter, when I brought out my last book, a reporter, she was a really nice lady and we were having a great interview and she was super interesting. And then she asked me out of the blue, she was like, what did she say to me? How do you justify working with these horrible, I was like, oh, wow. But I thought, to me, it's a room of individuals. And I said, if 10% of that room leave, doing a bit of meditation, doing a bit of breath work, doing a bit of the things that I'm sharing, I feel I've done my job, and I'm quite happy with that.
That's interesting. So what if they were listening to this podcast and they heard you say they're employing you to speak to their staff, and if they leave, then you've done your job?
I said I have said in the past, if they leave, I've done my job. But no, I said if they leave the room, doing a bit of meditation, doing a bit of breath work,
okay.
But I have been.
I'm not saying that. But
no, I have. Well, I have been blunt in the past with that regard. But
yeah, I guess it's just doing what's best for themselves. And if they are struggling, you're not doing anyone any favors.
No.
Do you know what I mean? You're not even doing the company a favor. So I'm probably doing the company a favor. But if you're living a life of just stress, and that's just gonna resonate throughout your team and blah blah blah. So yeah,
I think it was a bit more. I don't know. Is adversarial the word? I think when I was in my 20s, I started doing some speaking stuff in my 20s. Back when I was doing the fitness thing, I was a bit more. Thought I knew it. Not that I thought I knew it all, but I think it's easy when you achieve a few things. Probably like someone who's in really good shape. It can be easy to think like you've sussed everything when it comes to training and nutrition, and like you'd be deluded to you just not that you got lucky, you just were right time, right place, you did the right things. Or if I grow a business and I want to become a business coach just because my business was successful, it's kind of again a bit deluded in a sense. And I think because I had certain level of success in my 20s, I kind of thought, I know how people should live, and I've definitely softened. But back then, 10 years ago, I would have had the attitude that I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you how to live a life of purpose, and if you quit your job, great. But I'm past that. It is
What's the most important thing for you in those environments?
to bring more humanity. And again, that's like a judgy thing. I don't know how those environments are, but it feels a little stiff when I go in there. And oftentimes I'll do a pre-call with the corporate client, and I'll say, oh, I might do this, and I might do some interactive stuff, and they'll say, oh no, they won't be into that. They won't do that. And I'm like, I've nenever had a group that haven't done. Well, I've had some train wrecks.
Yeah, their heart's beating, and they'll be in for it.
But they love it, like it's we did one of the retreats I went on, we did a kind of mission. I wrote our mission statement for life, and what I came to was, and it's shifting all the time, but I said I create a connected. It says the world. What type of world do you create? So I said I create a connected and authentic world by creating space for myself and others to live with compassion, curiosity, and playfulness. So if I can bring that into the corporate space, and I can create a space in the corporate space where there can be a bit of play, bit of curiosity, compassion, leave with a few tools, leave knowing their colleague a little better. That's a successful day, I think, for me. Yeah, just giving people tools, and those are fast-paced environments that they're working in, and it's relentless. And sometimes I get messages directly after the sessions from people that are there, and they say, I really enjoyed that. But the reality of being here is like, we're going to be catching up now because we had a day of training. We're going to be catching up on the emails we missed tomorrow. So it's full on. So I don't know. All you can do is give the tools, I guess. And I think people are asking me recently about like, what's the future of employee wellness? I think it's psychoeducation. I think it's helping people to understand the nervous system and understand that, we talk about reactions earlier and emotional reactions. You can't, your biology and your physiology, you
Never
can't.
lies.
No, and you can't get past that. You can't think your way out of that. You have to be practicing, creating a sense of safety within yourself. That's the psychoeducation piece. When you're stressed, can you come back down to a state of calm? When you're shut down, can you bring a bit of energy back into the body? And that's they all talk about resiliency, right? It's a big word in the corporate world. Resiliency, and it's great. Obviously, like Josh Conley, a good friend of mine that's been on the show, he does a lot with resiliency as well. I think both him and our take on it is around, it's not being nitty gritty and being tough. It's how do I relate to my different emotions? So, it's not resilient if I feel sad and I start beating myself up and self-abandoning. It's resilient to be able to notice I feel sad, recognize that that's pointing me to something that's missing and something I need to look at, and then give myself what I need. So it's become dysregulated and leave your comfort, leave your place of comfort, get thrown off kilter, and then bring yourself back down to a sense of, I'm okay, I'm safe. And I think that's the practice.
Did the directors of the companies, do you feel that they really want to get the best out of their staff and want the best for them? Or is there a lot of kind of, I'm just doing this to tick the books kind of thing? Or is it a variation?
It depends. There's some companies and they're great. Like they're really, the learning and development teams and stuff in there are so enthusiastic, and I'm going in and they're talking about the books that they're reading, and they really live it, and they really will sit with me before and after a session and kind of talk about what worked and what didn't. And again, the feedback stuff is great.
Yeah, I guess I asked because these companies exist,
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah. I think it has shifted in the last, particularly since the whole pandemic thing. It went from being a tick the box to a necessity. It's interesting now, like my dad would be quite conservative and kind of saving for a rainy day, all that kind of mentality, and he'd often be fearful of like when I wanted to go into the fitness industry as a young man, he said, there's no industry, don't do that. And then I went into fitness, and then I was doing well in fitness, and I said, I'm going to get away from this. He's like, you'd be crazy to walk away from that. And then I walked away from that, and kind of thinks the life coaching thing is quite fluffy, but I don't see myself as a life coach. But he often says to me, make hay, because when there's a recession, that stuff's going to be the first thing to go. And I'm kind of curious, like, will the mental health stuff in the corporate space go if there's a big recession, or will it be even more needed? I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, fascinating.
We shall see.
Yeah, we will. I wanted to ask you about, I guess, what you're most excited about now. Like, what are you working on? Is there another book in the works? Like, what's present? I'm really trying to refine this year
we talk about wearing different hats and stuff like that.
Mm.
I just want to get better at the different things. I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. I want to get better at my understanding of the shadow and my ability to convey the shadow. So there's potentially a book in that. I want to get better at facilitating men's groups.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my three primary things: jiu-jitsu, men's work, and shadow work, and breath work.
Because you wear so many hats, this is what I'm finding out for myself. This year is about like streamlining.
Yeah.
All my 20s, I'm just diving into all these different things. Wear all these hats, multi-potentialite, like be this, because I think that is my nature. I think it's largely our nature as not specialists, generalists as a species. However, it is really powerful when you give the thing the best shot if you dive into one thing.
Yeah.
And it can be a podcast, a coaching, because they overlap. Like, do you find that you are, funneling your attention to a few things, and that's the focus?
Yeah, I want to try. I need to be a bit braver on that front. It's kind of interesting in a way. It feels, in a sense, like things have been gone backward. How would I put it? When I did the fitness thing 10 years ago, I was lucky. I got TV and radio slots in Ireland, and I was brought in by Facebook as an ambassador for Facebook. There was a lot of things happened early on that led to a big following. So I think I had 250,000 people on my Facebook page or something like that 10 years ago. And so when I shifted into personal development, I had an audience that kind of came with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of that audience would have been female. And now, like the last couple of years, my passion has leaned more into the men's work. But it feels a little bit like, am I just going to walk away from a good percentage of my audience and just like leave them, or will I just keep you in the bit?
Surprised. A lot of women love diving into men's work. I know what you mean. They might not turn up at the door, but
that's for me to be brave. I think
sure.
you probably have to take a couple of steps back and then deepen. Like
I get so many messages from women telling me that they are probably, in a way, I think this is, and I hope I don't offend people, they're kind of one step removed, and they message me because they're thankful, but they're also like emotionally detached from the subject matter or the real intricacies of what I'm talking about. But I do get a lot of messages from women that say, like, I'm so grateful that you're talking about this stuff, and it seems like it's noticed, I guess. Maybe that's just the people that reach out.
It's actually similar. I really appreciate that anytime I share men's work stuff, again, knowing that a lot of my audience are not into that, there's great support. Like, there's loads of messages from women that are saying it's great to see men getting this support. It's great to see these places, becoming more common, all that kind of stuff. So that's really cool to see. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, I started with a personal trainer, like just an online coach. I just wanted accountability for 12 weeks. So I check in with him, and I was like, nice. Oh, cool. And I joined a new men's group. So that was, again, accountability. And then I was thinking about relationship. I was like, I'd love to get some support on a specific, like around relationship, like intimate relationship. And so I started like looking for people, and like, can I find people that are actually really good at this and can kind of look at the shadow in relationships and intimacy and like all this kind of stuff. And I found a couple of guys, but that's an example of like really niching down. And like, I'll pay those guys a good amount of money compared to someone who's just like super broad, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So there's
definitely, if you've got an issue, like, find the person who's dived into it the most, whether that's health or...
I think you asked like, what am I focused on? I think that's part of it, is going back into more mentorship getting more mentors this year, specific mentors, as I suppose, for specific problems. John Mineland, who's a good teacher, talks about containers, like containers of growth. And so I think I'm trying to set up a couple of containers. So I'm in a health container now where I'm trying to get a lot of jiu-jitsu, eat really well, a lot of weight training, and I've got a specific tangible result within 12 weeks. So it feels good to have that container there. And I'd like to have a container, as I say, for like looking at my shadow in relationship and trying to unpack that a bit.
Nice. Yeah. I think it's really important to reach out to look for a coach in whatever aspect it is. Like, we can't do it. We can't look at our shadow by ourselves that well.
And the biggest thing they can give me, I think, specifically, I don't know how you are on this, but like, I almost want them just to hold the focus for me for 12 weeks, because like if I can say to them, this is what I need to work on for the next 12 weeks.
Yeah, the accountability is huge.
Don't let me come to you with a new idea next week. Like I come into your van here, I'm like, oh, there's the red book. I'm like, I was going to buy that. Then I say, oh, there's Ramdas. Like there's just so many things.
Yeah.
So I noticed that. I was like thinking with fitness, it was like, you can tell your fitness, I want to be 10% body fat and I want to be training weights 3 times a week and I want to be eating really well. And it's very tangible. And they're going to hold that for you. And they're going to make adjustments based on that for 12 weeks. And I thought, well, what if I was to say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z with my business, or X, Y, and Z in relationship, or my relationship to myself, or my meditation practice, and have someone hold that for me. So I'm not jumping from one thing to the next, which is one of my big shadows.
Nice, man. So you do a lot of public speaking. I want to just touch upon, have you always been a great communicator? Because I honestly feel, and you're an amazing role model, I want to kind of finish wrap up on this point. I think I would love my son to look up to you, because I think you have a beautiful energy conveying ideas and complex things and breaking them down and like making sure like you're not rushed, and you just have an amazing way of communicating.
Thank you.
That's one of the biggest reasons why I got you on the podcast, because I just think that is such an amazing trait to for me to learn from, but also to put out there and hopefully get more people listening to your channel. And you've been doing the podcast for a fair few years now.
Thank you.
But is that something that you've nourished? Did you get a coach for that? Like what was your process in refining your ability to communicate? Has that been something intentional, or has it come from your fitness background?
Thank you, firstly. It's nice to hear that feedback, and it's needed this week. There's days where I don't feel like that. I was terrified of public speaking. I was talking to a group yesterday. I did a gig in town, and I was looking at the audience. I was like, they're so young. Like they're like 19. A lot of the audience there were 19. And a few of the lads came up after and they said, oh, it was really useful. And I was talking about imposter syndrome and stuff, and they were saying, I can really relate to that. One of them was like, I've got a talk next week. And I was like, geez, I said, I didn't do a talk till I was like 25. I skipped school, I skipped college if there was talks to do, because it just terrified me. So I started speaking at 25 in terms of public speaking, and I set out to try and do 100 in a year for free. And I would do a talk, and then I'd sit down and I'd say what worked, what didn't, what do I need to improve on, and I just did the same talk. I got 88 in the end for free, so schools, colleges, inside people's sheds, like anywhere. I think that helped. I think like reading from a wide variety of sources and having different interests, like in a way that's my Achilles heel, because I spread myself too thin, but in another way it helps me to like, that's my gift, I think, is just taking different bits and putting them together. And then we talk about, how maybe there's a plan that's been there from day one, and there's an acorn within us that's just growing. And my mum was a teacher, and my dad kind of does seminars. Like he teaches accounting and auditing stuff. So they're both teachers in their own way. So maybe there's something there. I see myself as a teacher in a way. But no, it's been something I've tried to develop. I went for a walk with my friend yesterday, and he said, the thing that makes me laugh with you, he said, you'll explain something perfectly on a podcast, and then you'll say, that's another episode. I hope that wasn't too incoherent and like all over the place. And he's just like, no, it was absolutely spot on.
It's the most succinct thing I have on my phone. Like,
thank you.
It really is.
Thank you.
Like there's so much space for you in my life to listen to a podcast and know what I'm getting. Also, it's like, I just feel like everyone needs like a dose of because it's not for all the time. I definitely couldn't listen to you all day, but for that like hour in the week maybe that I do listen, it's like it's very valuable. Feels just different. There's just a difference.
Cool, thank you. Yeah.
To what I'm leaning into.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you get that feedback, like digestible, and it's just?
Yeah, someone gave me a lovely feedback. I was on someone's podcast recently, and he's got a big following or whatever, and we just met by chance, and he said, oh, I need to tell you, like, I've completely changed my style of podcast since I started listening to you. He said, I used to be a lot more formal, and he says, now I just relax and like just have a chat. And I was like, oh, that's nice to hear from someone. But yeah, my other challenge is, I don't know if you get, I think this is the imposter syndrome thing again. Part of imposter syndrome is like, for anyone not familiar with imposter syndrome, that idea that we're going to be found out or exposed or like whatever it might be, that like, how did I get here? Part of it for me is I really bury myself in study for the last like 15 years. I love it. That's what I do. And so things that are very obvious in my mind, I'm like, oh, I can't record a podcast. There's nothing in that. That's not going to, people are just going to be like, what? Like, duh. So I think maybe it's good for us all to remember that what's obvious to us is not obvious to other people.
Yeah, I spoke about that with someone the other day. I was like, we have, like, even if it's speaking to yourself a year ago, 5 years ago, like there were things that you know now that 5 years ago would love to really know that. But we always think that, and it may be a reflection of like who we perceive as our audience, maybe the people we know and are in touch with and are listening. They love us because we're similar, and there's like a lot of like interrelational stuff. But then there's a section of your audience, probably the majority, that you don't know, and they look to you, or they listen to you because you're really valuable to them. And like some of the simplest stuff that we talk about is so important to just keep just touching on, because it will impact people. And is there a way to kind of hack to understand and remind ourselves constantly that is something that we can all do? Look for feedback, I guess. It's keep doing those things and then look for the...
Yeah. It's funny as we talk about it, like there's part of me realizing you don't even need to say much. It can just be, even if all you're doing is reaffirming something someone already knows, or giving someone a leg up when they're down. That's all it really is.
As a reminder, I noticed you put out a podcast about imposter syndrome this year, early like February, and then last year it was like January.
Really?
Did you not know that?
No.
I was looking back and I was like, oh, it's interesting. And then I was just leaning in. I was like, there's no judgment there. There was like, let's listen to that one and let's listen to that one and see what's going on.
It was the exact same, I'd say, was it?
Pretty similar.
Yeah. I was thinking that. Yeah, because
but you know, like you're really intimate with that topic, so keep beating the drum.
I remember
it's like it lands differently every year, you know, for people.
I wrote down a few notes and I was thinking, like, I didn't listen to last year's one, and I was thinking, oh, this is just a repeat of last year's. There's some 260 episodes in it, like, run out of ideas at this stage. But yeah.
What's your intentions for the podcast moving forward?
I'm not sure. Sometimes when I meditate recently, like, it's kind of coming to me to like start a new podcast, like for men. So there's some resistance there too. So that's part of potentially. Then there's another part of me that thinks maybe I'll go to 300 and I'll just park it then. I don't know that I'll keep going forever. Sometimes I do interviews, as you've probably seen, like the odd time, but I don't do a lot of that. I don't know how into that I am. I don't know. I go through phases. There's days from like,
you don't need to know.
I'm not sure. It's been a good vehicle for me, and it's, you know what, I don't really like social media. I find it really hard to convey messages on social media, and to like, even if I follow people I love, they're not really, it's hard for me, at least it's hard to consume something in 60 seconds or less that's going to impact me.
What use is that, if we were really honest with ourselves, like how useful is the 5-10 videos that you watch a day?
Yeah.
The next day and then the next day, and what by the end of the week have you really understood?
Versus a podcast, like being in London this week, I was like, all right, I'm going to get my step cut. I'm going to do a lot of steps. So like 25,000 steps a day just from walking around the city and like looking at, but I've been listening to podcasts, and I go through phases with podcasts, but it really is amazing. Like if you find someone you're into or something you're into and you immerse yourself in that for a few hours, it really does start to shift your way of seeing things. Like if you listen to, I've never really listened to much of David Coggins, but if you listen to that for a week, that's going to change how you perceive doing a 5K. Or if you listen to, this is quite amazing how...
It's going to change how you perceive brushing your teeth, waking up in the morning, everything aspect.
Stay hard.
Yeah, it's true. Podcast changed my life. That's essentially why I started one.
Yes. You're good at this.
That is the feedback.
No, genuinely, it seems effortless to you.
Oh, we're on a podcast. That's what it should feel like, though. Really, that's the goal. But then there's, we could talk podcasts after for the people. But I appreciate you, man. It's been fun. I love just chatting and connecting.
We'll do
It's
it
been
again.
good.
So thank you.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, nice, man. Do you want to leave on any point, any Juan
Um,
Pablo quote, or anything you want to just speak to lastly, and where people can find you?
Maybe okay. I'll be a little bit transparent here. I had like one of my corporate jobs yesterday. It was like really difficult. I left that feeling deflated, and I was like, "Oh, what am I doing? What am I doing?" And I'm really hard on myself. My expectations. I need to learn to separate my expectations in a certain environment. If I'm in an environment where I'm brought in as a guest, it's different to an environment where people come and pay their own money and take time out of their own. It's very different,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And my friend asked me, what would success actually look like to you in that environment? And it's crazy what I would do. I'd be like, oh, everyone's leaving smiling and they've all changed that. It's just crazy stuff. So I know I was a bit deflated yesterday. So your kind words today and just getting to connect and stuff like that has lifted me. And my Jujitsu this morning has lifted me. So maybe we just leave with, yeah, that's the nature of life, is there's ups and there's downs and there's ups and there's downs. And you try to extract the lessons from where the challenges and the struggles are, and then look after yourself and be around people that, and lift other people up as well, because that's the nature of our lives, is sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, beautiful, man.
thank you for that.
Right.
Appreciate you.
Give you a hug, man.
Yes.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Appreciate your time. Subscribe, hit here for more, and enjoy your day.